Welcome everyone to the third webinar in our LeafMark Standard version 17 public consultation series. In this webinar, we will discuss the proposed changes in the version 17 draft to the soil and substrate management section of the standard and also the plant health and protection section of the standard. Before we get started, just to introduce myself and my colleague who will be running you through the webinar today. My name is Abby Holman. I am the Standards and Impacts Manager on the LeafMark team within Leaf. So I look after the development of the LeafMark standard as well as producer-facing support to meet the requirements and go through the certification process. And I also look after the impacts workstream within LeafMark, looking at how we can define indicators and intended outcomes of the LeafMark program and standard. And I'll hand over to Molly.
Hi, I'm Molly. I am the Standard Setting Officer here at Leaf. I've been here for just over 2 years now, and I work directly on the standard with Abby.
Thank you. Just a couple of items before we go through the slides. So today's session will be recorded and it will be available on Leaf's YouTube channel. So if you have any colleagues or anyone you work with or know who would like to look back at this webinar, they will be able to do so after today. We also will have a question and answer session at the end of our slide presentation. So if you do have any questions as we go, please do put the questions in the Q&A, the question and answer box, so that we can track those questions and make sure we get to them during our question and answer session. There is a chat feature. If you have any comments or need tech support or things like that, feel free to use the chat function. But if you do have questions, we would love if you put them in the Q&A box so we don't lose track of them. Okay, so a brief overview of the agenda for today. We're first going to just talk very briefly about the context of the slides and the changes that are being implemented in the standard, a bit about the LeafMark standard consultation process and what to expect moving forward. And then we'll go over the sort of key changes, high-level changes to version 17 to be aware of. And then we'll discuss the specific changes to the two sections that we're focusing on in this webinar. So the soil and substrate section and the plant health and protection section. And then at the end, as we mentioned, we will have a question and answer session, and we will probably have a good amount of time to go through questions during that time. So to start with a bit of context for the development of the LeafMark standard and the review process and also the consultation process. For those who might be new to LeafMark, LeafMark is a global environmental assurance system recognizing more sustainably farmed products. And the LeafMark standard is based on Leaf's integrated farm management approach, which is made up of 9 principles, which you can see to the right here on the screen in our integrated farm management wheel. And integrated farm management recognizes that nothing in farming acts in isolation. So how you're managing one area of the business will have an impact on another and so forth. For example, how you're managing your soils will have an impact on water and vice versa. And the LeafMark standard is reviewed every 3 to 5 years approximately to ensure that the requirements and the content are relevant to the needs of farmers and growers, and also evolves with industry practices, scientific understanding, but also in supporting producers to continue to develop and maintain sustainable and resilient businesses. So once the leaf mark standard is reviewed, we then go through a draft development process, and then we will take that draft out for consultation. So we've been working on developing the version 17 draft over the past few months, since the second half of 2023. And we're now at a place where we can put that draft out for consultation and get lots of stakeholder feedback from a wide range of stakeholders. So not only from our members and producers, but also other stakeholders like academics, other NGOs, government representatives, members of the public, and members of the supply chain. There are several ways to get involved in the consultation process. One of those ways is to attend a webinar like this, where we discuss those the key changes, I'll say, to the leaf mark standard, and provide opportunity for question and answers, as well as a very quick feedback link if you wanted to provide more comments to us or more feedback. We also have online surveys available for those who want to give a bit more detailed feedback. We have different options available there. I will say that we unfortunately weren't able to translate the draft version of the standard into the key languages that our standard is usually translated into. We only have that available in English at the moment. However, we have translated other documents into Spanish, Italian, and French for the consultation. So we do have a long summary of changes document that discusses all of the key changes throughout the whole standard. Those are translated into those languages. We also have a short version of that available. And then we do have surveys available in those key languages, which correspond to the summary of changes documents. So we do encourage review of those as well. We also, of course, accept comments, questions by email or by phone or letter. So however you would like to feed back to us, we want to make that as easy as possible for you through whatever mechanism works best for you. One final thing to note about this consultation, we are still developing and revising the livestock section of our standard. So that is currently not included in this public consultation, but it will be available for review in our next round of consultation, which we'll discuss at the end. So before we go into some detailed changes about the sections, we're just going to very briefly provide an update on the key changes to the standard that were applied to the whole standard, all sections, for you to be aware of. We did go into more detail about this in our very first webinar, our introduction webinar, which is on our YouTube channel, so feel free to refer to that if you'd like more information. But some key changes to be aware of in version 17 that we're proposing are some structural and language-based changes. So these are really to help improve the navigation of the standard and also improve things like the international applicability of the requirements and create or revise requirements so that they're more simple and clear to understand. So within the standard, we've created subsections within each section of the standard so that we have grouped control points by their topic or theme so that they're a bit easier to navigate. We've also reformatted control points so that they are easier to read and understand exactly what producers need to do or exactly what an auditor needs to check during an audit. We're also adding a guidance column to the standard, which will provide sort of immediate definitions or guidance to producers in interpreting the requirement and understanding what they need to do to meet that requirement. A note just to say that guidance column is still in development. So what you see in version 17 is not the final version of the guidance column. There is still a lot of guidance that we will be adding. For version 17, we'll also make an Excel format of the standard available for the first time. And we are exploring other formats or design approaches that might better address those accessibility needs for those with learning needs or reading needs. And any suggestions on how we can better support in this area are always welcome. A final thing to note, we do plan to have a new translation available of version 17, but also we will be making version 16.1, which is the current live version of the standard available in Portuguese in the next month or two. If there are other languages that you would like to recommend we translate the standard to, we do welcome those suggestions and we'll explore those options if there is that demand for it. So please do share with us. Another key change to be aware of within version 17 that we again went into more detail about in our introduction webinar, which is available on our YouTube channel, is the shift in our approach to categorizing control points and moving towards a more tiered approach to the LeafMark standard. So within version 16.1, the current LeafMark standard, and in all of the historical versions of the standard, we have taken the approach to use essential and recommended categories for our requirements. So in version 16.1, essential requirements or control points are mandatory. They are required for LeafMark certification. Recommended control points are optional for LeafMark certification, but are a way to demonstrate continuous improvement or provide ideas for producers to explore how continuous improvement can be considered or implemented by their business. Within version 17, we're proposing a shift in these categories to core and advanced requirements. We're proposing that core requirements are mandatory for businesses to comply with to achieve LeafMark certification, just like the essential control points in version 16.1. We're also proposing that advanced requirements are categorized in the standard. So these advanced control points are not going to be mandatory for certification. They will be optional. And there are two types of advanced control points. So the first, advanced 1 control points, they are more rigorous or potentially more difficult to implement than core control points. And building off of those are advanced 2 requirements, which are more rigorous than those advanced 1 control points and potentially more difficult than the advanced 1 control points to implement and achieve. We will also remain or keep the not applicable option for many control points in the standard. So we recognize that not all requirements across the standard will be applicable to all business types and enterprises. So we will enable that flexibility and that more site-specific approach by including not applicable options where certain requirements won't be applicable to certain businesses or enterprises. Another note, we will be collecting a lot of feedback on this approach, and we do plan to perform more in-depth sort of feasibility testing and trial auditing with this approach as we develop version 17. So building on these new control point categories, we're proposing this tiered approach to leaf mark certification. We're proposing that the new control point categories correspond to new leaf mark tiers. So there will be a core tier and an advanced tier. And really the purpose of this, as well as the purpose of moving to the core and advanced approach with the requirements, is to demonstrate that leaf mark producers might be at different stages in their integrated farm management or sustainability journey. And this will really provide a way for producers to demonstrate where they are in that journey, what they're achieving, provide opportunities or ideas for continuous improvement, and potentially making that continuous improvement pathway a bit more clear or supportive. If we have a look at this table, this summarizes how the control point categories correspond to the different proposed tiers. So core control points will be required for leaf mark certification, and by meeting the core control points, a business will automatically fall into the required core tier. These core requirements will also be need to be met in order for a producer to achieve the advanced tier. The advanced 1 control points, which are the step up from the core control points, are not required for leaf mark certification. They are optional. They are not required for the core tier, but they are required for the advanced tier. The advanced 2 control points, again, those are not required for leaf mark certification. They are not required for the core tier, and they will be optional to meet in the advanced tier. So basically, the advanced tier consists of at least the advanced 1 requirements. A business needs to meet all advanced 1 requirements to fall into the advanced tier. And we will be providing a way for businesses to demonstrate what tiers or advanced criteria they are achieving. So this won't necessarily be listed on the leaf mark certificate, but we will provide a mechanism for businesses to evidence this and demonstrate this to stakeholders. If you do have any questions about this, again, we will have plenty of time in the question and answer section, and we also have more details available in our introduction webinar if you would like to look back at that. So now I will hand over to Molly, and she will walk us through the key changes to the soil and substrate management section.
Thank you, Abby. Okay, so moving on to the soil and substrate section. So the title of this section has been renamed. Now this has been changed to better reflect the objectives of integrated farm management and also of the leaf mark requirements. So originally this section was called the soil management and fertility, but it's now being renamed to soil and substrate management. And reasons for this change include increasing relevance to producers who do not grow in soil. So those include hydroponics, aeroponics, and vertical farms, amongst others. Slide, please, Abby. Thank you. So the first new control point added to the soil and substrate management section includes control point 2.1.2. That is a substrate management plan. Now this control point is core, meaning all requirements where applicable must be achieved, but it's not applicable to businesses who do not grow in substrate. Now it's been added for relevance to businesses that do not grow in soil and to ensure that growing medium is managed sustainably. For example, it requires businesses to reference the choice, the utilisation, the management, and also the disposal of substrate. Next slide. Another new control point includes control point 2.7. Measures are taken to avoid soil salinisation. Again, this control point is core, meaning all requirements, where applicable, must be achieved. And this control point is not applicable to businesses who do not grow in soil. It's been added to this section due to the growing prevalence of soil salinisation in agriculture, which, as we know, has detrimental impacts on both soil fertility and also soil condition. And the aim of this control point is to encourage businesses to be aware of and take measures to prevent and also mitigate soil salinisation and its negative impacts on soil condition. Now, this includes avoiding excessive salt penetration and taking measures to optimise irrigation. It's worth noting that guidance will be created for this control point and will be made available in the guidance column in the version 17 leaf marks. Next. So the final new control point added to this section includes control point 2.8. Peat-free growing media is considered by the business. Now, this control point is applicable for both indoor and protected cropping businesses that are growing in peat-based growing medium. And this control point is categorised as Advanced 1, meaning all requirements, where applicable, are encouraged but are not mandatory. And it's not applicable to businesses that do not use peat as their growing medium. It's been added to a section to encourage businesses to review how they can phase out the use of peat-based growing medium and to ensure sustainable alternatives to peat are being used. This is because peat growing medium is sourced and extracted from peatlands, which, as we know, negatively impacts the environment, biodiversity, and can release significant quantities of carbon dioxide emissions. Now, where peat is being used as a growing medium, the business must provide a clear justification for this that includes those mentioned in point F in the verification text. So measures to reduce reliance on peat-based substrate. There should be reduction targets that are appropriate and realistic to the business, and also sourcing substrate materials from suppliers that encourage sustainably managed resources. Next slide. So a control point that has had significant amendments includes control point 2.3, which is soil health is measured at least annually. Now, this control point is core, meaning all requirements, where applicable, must be achieved, but it's not applicable to businesses that do not grow in soil. Now, this control point still requires producers to measure soil health annually, which is currently a mandatory requirement in version 16.1. But the wording of the control point now clarifies that the test chosen by the business should be used to monitor the physical, chemical, or biological characteristics of the soil. So monitoring physical characteristics may include monitoring soil structure through tests like BESS or water infiltration. Monitoring biological characteristics may include tests to measure the soil organic matter or also count earthworms, as just a couple of examples. And then finally, monitoring chemical characteristics may include tests to measure the soil pH. Now, the aim of this change is to support producers to monitor and understand the conditions of their soils so that they optimise their soil management decisions, and measurements should also be taken and recorded annually. Now, we do recognise that not all soil tests will be accessible or appropriate. So we allow the business to select the type of tests they choose and to also provide a justification for this. This control point does not require businesses to conduct tests where soil samples are sent to labs unless they wish to do so. And we are developing guidance as you can see in the guidance section, so you can use any of those to implement within your business. Next slide. Now, control point 2.6, measures are taken to avoid soil degradation, has also had major changes for version 17. Again, this control point is core, meaning all requirements where applicable must be achieved. But this control point is not applicable to businesses that do not grow in soil. The main control point text has been simplified and new requirements were added to the verification text to ensure the business takes action to prevent soil degradation, which can include compaction, slumping, poaching, erosion, runoff, or leaching. There is also a new requirement that encourages businesses to reduce tillage and incorporate cover crops due to their many benefits for supporting soils and reducing degradation. But we do recognise that some businesses might not be able to implement these types of practices. So we have specified that these are implemented where possible and also where appropriate.
Thank you, Molly. So we'll now go over the key changes to the plant health and protection section within the Leaf Mark Standard version 17. So the first thing to note, the title of this section has also changed. It's been renamed to better reflect the objectives of integrated farm management and the leaf mark requirements that are within this section. The section of this title in version 16.1 and historically has been crop health and protection, but we're proposing the section is renamed to plant health and protection in order to really recognize the importance of plants that are not specifically grown as crops on farms. So this would include things like grassland. So really just broadening the scope of this section a bit to better apply to businesses that have more than just crop plants. The first change to note within this section is the very first control point. So the core requirements and ask of this control point are still the same, but we've modified the language a bit to really emphasize the different principles of integrated pest management within the plant health and protection management plan. So this requirement is core, so that means it's mandatory for leaf mark certification. That is the same approach in the current standard. It is essential for certification. This control point really aims to ensure that the management plan covers all aspects of integrated pest management, such as the agronomic practices, including things like crop rotation, undersowing, resistant varieties, things like that. Potential decision support to monitor and forecast and inform decisions. Potentially implementing biological control. So for example, that might include using beneficial organisms to address unwanted pest populations, and where necessary, chemical control. And within the management plan, we've sort of tried to make address the flow of these approaches from potentially how we might prioritize the different approaches if possible. So looking at those agronomic practices, decision support, and biological measures first, potentially, and where necessary, or if needed, then moving on to thinking about or considering where chemical control might be required. It's also worth noting that there are a couple of requirements in this section that have been modified, not in the ask or the requirement of the control points, but control points have been combined so that they are simplified for the standard users and businesses to navigate. So there are some requirements in version 16.1 that had a very similar focus and scope. So those were combined into one control point in order to simplify the requirement and make sure that the requirements are clear and to remove duplication. So hopefully this section has been a bit more simplified to reduce that duplication. So with that covers really the key changes of those sections to be aware of. There are some minor wording or formatting changes that we encourage you to have a look at in the version 17 draft. So do have a look. Feel free to ask us questions on those additional details as needed. But just to provide an overview of the next steps of the development of the version 17 standard, we're currently in our first round of public consultation. Again, we have those surveys available for you to feedback on the requirements. Otherwise, feel free to give us a call or send an email with any feedback or questions or comments. We also have some remaining webinars to review the proposed key changes in the remaining sections of the standard. So if you haven't had a chance to review or attend the first webinars, those will be available on our YouTube channel. That includes an introduction to the version 17 standard, a bit more detail about the standard setting process, how version 17 has been developed, the consultation process, as well as going into more detail about those key structural and language changes, as well as the proposed tiering approach. So there's more detail in that webinar. We also already conducted a webinar providing an overview of changes to the business planning and resilience section of the standard and the engaging society section of the standard. We do have 2 more webinars to go, and in those we'll cover the waste and byproduct management section changes and water management changes. So that will be happening next week, I believe. And then our final webinar will cover the energy and greenhouse gas emissions section and landscape and biodiversity section changes. We will then, at the end of this consultation, which closes on the 10th of May, we will be reviewing all of the feedback and comments and making any appropriate revisions. We'll be responding to questions, things like that. And then we plan to hold a second round of consultation to provide an opportunity for stakeholders to feedback on those revisions. We're estimating this will happen in July, but we will announce the exact time frame of that second round of consultation. And we estimate that version 17 will be published in early 2025, likely January, and it will become effective for auditing 6 months later. So there will be a 6-month transition time between the current version of the standard and version 17. So with that, we will move on to our question and answer session. We also have put in the chat a link to a very quick feedback form. So if you aren't able to complete any of the other surveys that we have on our public consultation page, we do encourage you to provide some feedback on the proposed changes we covered today. We put this link in the chat. It will take you maybe 1 to 2 minutes. It would be great to hear some feedback. It's very quick, so we would appreciate that.